Good evening, everyone. It's Friday, December 5th, 2014. I'm in a river. I'm also a forensic historian and a tribal historian on Native American slavery of the Southeast. And tonight, I want to give you a few pointers when it comes to genealogy and getting beyond roadblocks or brick walls. And we're going to approach that tonight from a metaphysical perspective. And what I mean by that, our thoughts are metaphysical. Our actions are metaphysical. Our feelings are metaphysical. With genealogy, the first thing one must understand is knowing the history of a particular family, person, geographic location, time, and events. So tonight, I'm going to deal with the East Coast, and I'm going to deal with the Southeast. From time to time, I'll discuss the Northeast, but it's very crucial. When I research Native American or American Indian heritage, I don't apply the Dawes Roll because I don't need to. Many of you don't need to, so I don't use it in my applications. I don't use it in my research. Many a times, there are many individuals that are on the Dawes Roll that Native heritage may not apply. As a result of that, we don't use it. What we teach you to deal with colonial history, the census schedules, slave narratives, manumission records, tax records. It doesn't matter that many of your ancestors were reclassified as free people of color. In the colonial days, if your ancestors are Native, you will find it in the court records, you will find it in the slave narrative, you will find it in the manumission records, you will find it in the probate records, you will find it in the church canon laws records, you will find it in the history of Methodism. These things are very important. So as you do genealogy, you have to do something that is called thinking. And you have to think outside the box, which is crucial. However, many citizens and many Native brothers and sisters, both white and black, but especially white at the moment. Now, I want to touch on this to my Caucasian brothers and sisters, because in earlier times, many Native Americans are under the umbrella of Negro and free people of color. So when you see that blackness, you just totally disregard an ancestor. That type of thinking don't get you beyond brick walls, because Native American people were reclassified also as white. Negro, black, depending on the community. So you have to get beyond that stigma of color and deal with the blood aspect of it. These things are crucial. The biggest enemy many times in your genealogy research is you. Because you have these stigmas in your mind and they give you a blockage. And you have to free your mind, clear your mind. Many a times you have to think about the think about. You have to think about the what if, what might be. You can't disregard these things. You have to go look at signs, look at headstones, look how they're turned in the cemetery, look how the names are spelled. Examine some of the headstones that are next to them, especially when you go back more ancient, when you're getting back until 1820s and 1830s and on back. These things are crucial. You have to think of the traditions of your ancestors. What did your grandmother do? What did your grandfather do? What's some of the songs he sung? What's some of the songs that she sang? How did she pray? How did he pray? For Southeast people, the church is very important. And a lot of people don't understand this because they haven't lived it, relived it. Many of us still live in it and re-understand it. A chief became a deacon in the church. The medicine man oftentimes became the preacher or the pastor. In Georgia and South Carolina for a very long time, we could not practice our ceremonial dances and culture. So you had to incorporate it in with the church. Things are very important. Many people overlook that. And I've said this 1,000 times before. In the AME church, the Holy Ghost dance is the ghost dance. Well, Chief, why is that? Once again, because Native American people brought those practices and principles into the AME church. But you got to understand, the AME church was once the Colored Methodist church. So if you study the history of Methodism in Georgia, you will understand at one time frame that the went to the African Methodist Church, which is the AME. So they consolidated. But many AME churches in Georgia and South Carolina are independent today because of their native heritage. These things have been swept under the rug and hidden in the closet, and no one wants to talk about them. It is no myth that Native Americans and Africans who were free and who ran away or went to live in native nation, this was plentiful in the Southeast, especially in Georgia and South Carolina and Florida. And don't omit Alabama because it came later in time. But right now, let's deal with Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. These things are very important. But because of the stigma of the Dawes role, which is why, once again, I don't apply it to our application of teaching. Because it doesn't deal with genealogy. It deals with who was lucky at that day, who was lucky to get on those roads. So the native people who didn't travel west or didn't travel to a reservation or settle there in Georgia and South Carolina remain colored. Many of you work with many so-called African Americans, and you look at them sometime and you scratch your head because don't look African or they look Hispanic or mixed or whatever, and this is the reason for that. Now, there's a concept out there that African Americans and not Africans. Let me tell you that. Get rid of that concept. Many Africans came to this country. 500,000. Well, I said, well, Chief Langley, where did you get this information from? Researching the slaves manifest. But see, too many times the African Americans are concentrating on the slaves. Okay. Well, what about the other 250,000 that came in this country that was free, that was indentured, that the history books don't tell you about? But Chief Langley, where do you get that information from? Go search the British archives. Search the immigration records of the Africans that were living among the British for 200 years before slavery even exists here in America. These people came through immigration. So don't go looking for any African names because they have become Christianized. And their names are John, Peter, Richard, Paul, Solomon, David, Mary, Sue, Ginger, Alex, Alexander. So when you search the immigration records, you find out who these people are. But then again, many of those people, because they were indentured servants, was also on convict ships that came into this country. And the British set up convict colonies. And many of you don't know what convict colonies are. Those are the penal colonies. Certain parts of Virginia, certain parts of North Carolina, certain parts of Massachusetts, certain parts of South Carolina. These were convict colonies. And the British sent the Scottish and Irish slaves here by the thousands. And that's something else a lot of white people don't want to deal with, which they should, because it's been written out of the history books. There were thousands of Scottish and Irish slaves in this country. Native Americans were enslaved first. Scottish and Irish, second. Africans came last. But Native American slavery lasted throughout, even though the king supposed to have outlawed it between 1750 and 1758. But it still continued on because of those Virginia laws in 1682 that Indians and Africans who are not in enmity with the state and are in servitude will be called Negro. So you got to understand this. The concept of Indian slavery is very important. Modern scholars have not done us justice because they are written on a biased account and have omitted history. So you got to be careful. So tonight I'm taking you on a metaphysical journey. And there are things you can't omit and you can't be blinded by. You got to go dig deep beneath the surface of time. You got to dig into the colonial laws of the colonies, of the provinces, of the parishes. You have to dig into the plantation laws, see what the workman laws were, the servants' laws were, slaves' laws were. And let me explain something to you. Even though chattel slavery was in this country, not every plantation enhanced it. You can't generalize slavery across the board of these 13 colonies because it's not the same. Because many plantation slaves didn't get whipped. They were free to roam around as indentured servants. They were free to marry. They were free to take second jobs off the plantations and get salaries. You have to understand this thing. So now let's deal with Georgia. Many people don't realize when Georgia was first developed, Georgia was a free state. So now with Georgia being a free state, and in the 1680s, when Virginia decided to expel 66,000 Africans out of that 250,000 that came in, where did they go? North Carolina, South Carolina. Let's go into Georgia because it's free. And if you study the Christian records and archives, you will find out in 1820 there were 27,000 free Africans living in Georgia. So when Georgia became a slave state, where did these free Africans go? Many of them became slave owners. And unhappy that some people want to hear this, many Caucasians descend from these free African slave owners of the Southeast, especially in Georgia along the Middle Savannah River. The folks don't want to listen to this, but I'm going to tell you, genealogy deals with you. 200 years ago, many African Americans today may have been white. 200 years ago, many Caucasians today may have been white, may have been black. So what happens? The offspring of those children decide to marry a native, an Indian, or an African. That child becomes mulatto. That child has a choice. What are you going to do? Are you going to marry him back into the black or to the white or the native? So he decides to marry black. His children marry black. Then he decides to marry white. And white again. And white again. And 3 generations later, you're back to being Caucasian again. And same apply to African American. And same apply with the Native American. But when they came along with the one-drop blood rule of creating quadroon, octoroon, mulatto, but you have to understand the laws of racial classification. Early English laws were adopted from the Spanish laws. So depending on where you are in colonial times, in the 1700s, from the Spanish perspective, that mulatto is a Negro and an Indian. From the English perspective, in Virginia, that mulatto is a white woman and of an African. The thing about the Negro in the 16, 17, 1800s, and even today, you have to be very careful because South Carolina, I'm going to deal with South Carolina right now, my home state, had more Indian slavery than any other colony. So the Indian slave trade began to look like the African slave trade because it took on those characteristics. So they made no distinction between the Indian slave trade and the African slave trade. So therefore, in slavery, it was no distinction. They were both called Negro. But now this is the ticket. When manumissions came in records, it says Indian or it says black. These things you have to research. Other slaves rarely in slavery time, when you look at these records, they classified the white slaves by color. They just say slave. So you got to understand this when you read it. Because anything other than white is classified by mulatto, black, free people of color, or Indian. But South Carolina had over 75,000 Scottish and Irish slaves. Well, people say, well, indentured servant is not the same. Well, that depends on where you are and the rules that apply. Because if they broke any laws or a woman got pregnant or they ran away, their indentured was lengthened to life. See? But because of that boat ride, they had to serve out a 4 or 7 year term. Studying history helps you with genealogy. Colonial records and events, and I said 1,000 times, and I said again, has been swept under the rug, hidden in a closet, and disregarded or omitted. So now you got to go into the spirit of things and have an open mind and begin to dig beneath the surface of things. These things are very important. You have the question to think about now. Because you're going on a journey and you're not looking for color. You're looking for your blood. You're looking for your ancestor. And whether they are Indian, African, or white, that ancestor is what got you here today. So you think about that very carefully. Whether it was an act of rape, or whether it was an act of forbidding love, that ancestor is the root of your tree. And when you unlock that, they will unlock you and remove the brick walls. And see, many a times you got to go dig deep in the spirit. Catch a dream. Go with them in the dream. You find your answers. Well, Chief, how is that possible? Because the life that was in their bodies still exists. And you are a part of them. So that consciousness, you have to awaken consciousness. It's not difficult to do. I tell people all the time, many a times, my mother and father come visit me. I smell my father's shaving powder. I smell my mother's face powder puffs or perfume. Yeah, that's the essence of her. They're still here. But you were so spooked by ghosts. Leave that alone. They didn't harm you. If your mother loved you and your father loved you while they were here on this planet in the flesh, they love you in spirit. There's no need to fear. But when it comes to genealogy for questions you don't know, family, they have the answers. So you got to remove that fear that you have. Fear blocks the blessings. Every time. You want to develop the feeling of love and harmony and joy. And all barriers are removed. Many a times in your dreams, or in your visions, you get a name or vision of somebody you can't recognize, but you ignore that. What you need to start thinking, is this one of my ancestors that I don't have a picture of? There's a tall black man that's always watching. That might be your great-great-grandfather that you know nothing of. There's a tall white man. That might be your great-great-grandfather that you know nothing of. Remove the blindness of hatred and prejudice. You're a product of it. You can't do nothing about the past. You deal with now and tomorrow. These things are key. These things are very important. Searching Native American, Indian ancestry is very easy. I'm telling you. Many writers have said it has been difficult because they're comparing it to the Dawes Roll or the Miller Rolls. We don't need that. Let's deal with these people who lived in the community. Because up to 1930, you didn't have no problem. When they decided to implement the one-drop blood rule in the census law, you became denied. If you have any African American in you, and the whiter side of things were accepted. Well, Chief, you begin to sound, no, I'm not. Go read the 1930 census law. Because my talk tonight is to give an understanding to the black and the white that has Native in their blood. If you don't like what I'm saying, you can exit this call because I'm giving you an understanding of things so you can progress. Because you both may share a common ancestor. He might have taken one Indian man, might have taken one African wife and took one Scottish wife. Are the children not his? I have an ancestor by marriage, George Gaplin, from the Silver Bluff Plantation. Married one white, one African, and a couple Native women. So from all those creed, those children are not his. Those children don't share a common ancestor. His blood is tied within all three. The French, the African, and the natives. So let's deal with the natives because we're dealing with two different races of native. You're dealing with a Creek and you're dealing with a Yuchi. Then again, you need to understand, Creek is a confederation. I take issues with the Creeks on many things because I, as a Yuchi, my ancestor predates them. All you got to do is go look at the history. Go back on the maps of 1600 and see if you find Creek. Or it comes into play after it was invented in the early 1700s, in the midst of that great Yamasee War, the invention of the Creek Nation. Check out maps and see that you see Cherokees in the 1600s. Or do you see Cherokee? So you got to understand, through the development of time, native name changes. My people, the Yuchi, our name have changed so many times. It's like the Negro and the African American. We done been Uchis. We done been Uchin. We done been Uchi, Y-U-C-H-I, U-C-H-I-S, Hooligi, Cheska. The Uchis probably have 7 or 8 different derivatives over time. But we're the same people. The folks tell me, well, the Uchis originated in Tennessee. I'm sorry. When DeSoto came through, there was no Tennessee. We're dealing with the Carolinas. So someone said, well, how so? What do you mean, how so? Let's go look at the maps. The area now is called Tennessee, but it wasn't back then. Just because DeSoto didn't come in contact with certain people didn't mean they don't exist. So do you call the same tribe that's 200 miles away different? That may have been their territory. That might be an extension of the family over there. See, these are things you have to be concerned about when you go read history. Everything Cherokee ain't Cherokee. Everything Creek ain't Creek. What do the Cherokee Confederation make up? How many tribes are in there? How many tribes are in the Creek Confederation? Yuchi don't speak Muskogee. Miccosukee don't speak Muskogee. However, you have the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Creeks. They all speak the same language. Muskogee speakers. I speak Yuchin. See, when you understand these things, it's easier for you to digest now in your research. I don't fault the Cherokees a lot of times when they tell people they're not Cherokee, because respectfully, they don't say you're not Indian, because they're historians and they know they were not in certain places. So those territorial lands were just given to them by the government in trade for treaty promises, and they never inherited those places. They never lived there. They never put any villages there. If you take the time and go study history, you would realize this. So someone saying you're not Cherokee is not saying you're not Indian. You may not be. You might be one of those tribes that made up that confederation. But I tell you what, when you go look at when they were developing the 5 civilized tribes, and I take issue with that 5 civilized tribes, because to me, 3 of them are the same. Choctaw and Chickasaw, same. Creek and Seminoles, the same. Seminoles weren't around in the 1600s. They didn't use that term. They all speak Muskogee. So where's the 5 civilized tribes? You mean 3? Because the Creek and the Seminoles are the same people, and the Chickasaw and the Choctaw are the same people, then you have the Cherokee. So how many is that? If we need to analyze the situation, I'm an engineer by trade. I don't deal with gray. I deal with black and white. So let's deal with the real facts here and get an understanding of things. See? I don't need BIA benefits to tell me I am Indian. My grandmama told me that. My granddaddy told me that. My mama told me that. My daddy told me that. My great aunt told me that. I don't need paper for that. That is to be understood. But as a native that know who he is, I demand to be respected of that. It's probably why I spend so much time grafting my skills and understanding as a genealogist so I can become an effective genealogist and give people solutions and not give them theory. Let's deal with this raw data. Many of you don't know who you descend from. Don't you just develop your families and create an anthropologist or an archaeologist research on your family? And go file permits and dig one or two of your ancestors up who's been buried for about 150 years. And study. Examine the clothing that's buried in the grave. Examine the jewelry that they have on and see what nation or tribe or band it is tied to. Well, Chief, I didn't know I can do that. I thought that was how is it not illegal if you go get the permits? They can go all the way around the country. Y'all just do it all the time. Digging in mounds, digging up people. You can do the same. You're not disrespecting your ancestors. These are things you need to understand, which you can do, which you need to sit down and advise a plan to do with. These things are very important, and life is very important. So we got to understand. So tonight is metaphysical, deep metaphysical. And we ask ourselves questions, things you refuse to think about, renewing your research, opening the back door. What am I thinking? The simple things we ignore. Why did I do that? That was right before your eyes. The ancestor I never knew. Beware of the signs. Will you see your mother and father again in spirit? Leaning on your faith. Or you're in the middle of the road. Can't turn back now. I'm almost there. Then this is it. I knew I should have looked at that. This search is over to the next. One ancestor at a time. Do you know who you are? These are the questions that has rattled your mind as a family historian or genealogist. You got to question yourself. Another thing you should not do not rely on anybody's family tree. You don't know where they got their information from. You don't know how reliable that information is. You don't know if they're truthful. You don't know if they did any in-depth research. So why grab it and put all these things on your trees to get confused? Because one ancestor may throw you off 200 years. Don't do that. Rely on yourself. Well, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I got all this stuff out. I'm sorry. You may have did it wrong for 20 years. But now you have the time to correct it. So get rid of the ego. Many a times you have to put your ego in your pocket. Or your back pocket. A matter of fact, don't carry it in your pocket at all. Take it and just throw it away somewhere and get rid of it. It stops your blessing. You got to do a reassessment. Sit back, cool, calm, and collected. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Let me reevaluate this. I was looking at it wrong. See, many a times in life, a stumbling block is nothing but a stepping stone when you look at it. If you don't see the stumbling block, you stumble. But if you look at it, you can analyze it, how to go over it, how to go around it, or should I just reposition this? These are things you have to do. It's not difficult. You just have to start thinking and apply your thinking. But you get so arrogant with it, you don't do it. These things are very important in ancestor research. Don't ignore these things. Well, I done did all this. I don't want to do all that. No. Well, you won't solve your problem because now the enemy is you. And it lies within you. Why, are you too embarrassed? Why are you so embarrassed to correct your own problem that you created by your lack of knowledge or understanding? In life, we learn by experience, whether good or bad. You can have a bad experience or you can have a good experience. My father that raised me, my grandfather, Daddy taught me something that I didn't realize and grab a hold of till I got older. And my dad always said, that guy come over here and hit your mom or your sister, don't hit him. Go over and hit his mother and his sister. Then he's going to sit down at the bargain table. It's a whole different concept. He knows what it feels like. Because he attacked your loved one, you attack one of his. See, when people understand certain situations, something called respect comes into play. You can respect the known and you can respect the unknown. Most time it's rather to respect the unknown and not engage in conflict. Your ancestors, many of you have 1,000 generations in you. But let's just deal with 500 years. I hear people all the time want to give credit to the Olmecs being Africans, but they don't go back and read the anthropologists who came up with that theory. So you deny the Mexicans with the full lips. You deny the Japanese with the full lips. The Chinese, the little heads are all over the place in Asia. You're going back 10,000 years or 3,000 years, but you can't name an ancestor 3 generations ago. If that ain't a reality check for you, I don't know what is. I don't deal with theories, I deal with facts. DNA is not going to tell you who your grandmother was if you don't know her. You need to go learn your history. It's not going to tell you who your grandfather was. It's going to give you a geographic area where they say you came from, and you're going to need a common ancestor. Your DNA cousin is not your blood kin. That's the reality of things. Okay, on your obituary is your DNA. Well, where's his grandfather? Where's his mother? Where's his father? Where's his great-grandfather? I don't know. He just went on the DNA test. You people better think. I'm not fond of DNA for genealogy. I am when it comes to paternity. However, and listen to me carefully because I don't want you to misquote me. If you're going to use DNA, go resume one of your ancestors that's been buried for about 100 or 150 years. Test them with yourself. These things are very important. Don't get caught up in the old blood theory. Well, my grandmother was a Uchenian, born in 1913. Her mother, my mother, they are B blood type. They're not native. Some things begin to be nonsense because you're dealing with early European ideologies. Who developed the concept of race? Go study it. Come back and talk to me. These are theories. After being accepted for so long, appear to be fact. According to who? When the census takers first start taking the census, according to a necessity, they took it to skin color. Did you know that? Then go research it. I've seen some dark Mexicans. They don't speak English. You can call them black. I've seen some dark Chinese. You can call them black. Might be dark in color. What language do they speak? Do you know the number of native people who remained in the South from 1860 up until 1930? Because they didn't speak English, they placed them in mental institutions. But Chief, I never go check the census of these hospitals and see how many native people were sent there because they spoke. Check the insane asylum. You find an ancestor that's missing in the 1800s or the dates I just gave you, go check the jails. The best thing you callers can do, and those listening, go study the history of the census and how it was taken and what rules and regulations applied. These things are crucial. These are the things that you need to do. You have to analyze and break this down. Stop doing genealogy research. Go study the census. Take 3 days off of your genealogy starting tonight and go study the history of the United States Census. And once you get an understanding of it, you will get beyond all ancestor roadblocks and brick walls because you will understand what is. Well, why my ancestor at one time is mulatto? Then why 5 years down the line or 10 they're black? Another 10 years down the line, now they're white. Another 10 years down the line, now they're free people of color. Go study the history of the census, people. You will understand. See? I study genealogy from an American Indian Yuchi perspective. So I see things differently. Anyway, why don't you go join these genealogies? I'm not joining none of those genealogy groups because my genealogy deals with tribal applications and what happened in the Southeast. I'm not going to join them because they don't like the method that I teach or what I'm teaching and have the opportunity to kick me out. Not today. My grandmother made me chief. I developed my own educational system for the little nation and the tribe we have. That's what a chief is supposed to do. Create your own learning. And you don't wait for nobody else to do that if they've been doing it wrong. I applaud many of those organizations out there. I'll follow the GPS standard. But I know my history. I know my terrain. I know what happened in South Carolina and Georgia along that Savannah River. So I don't need your indexes to come in, and when they see that Negro or mulatto and move it today and put African American, I take issue with that because I know the history of my people. If you study the history of that area, they would know. There's a reason the Bureau of Ethnology said that people in the Southeast, especially the Negro, is unquestionably Indian. Because they know about native slavery and these people in these corridors that exist today. These things are very important. You can't go through life ignoring these things. These are facts. Just take your time and study. You know, the Native American went through a process. If you look at a lot of the old photos, they're dark-skinned people. Hollywood today give you a picture of something that looks like an Italian. No, that's not reality. That wasn't the way it was 100 years ago. I don't argue with that. We got to deal with some facts here. What happened? Was it disease? No. Let me explain something to y'all. Indian slavery and writing nations out of existence because of slavery and placing them under these social constructs of Negro and colored and black and white is what killed the population of the Native Americans, especially putting them under the Negro banner. These things are crucial. They are very important. Well, Lewis Gates, I don't care what. Have him call me. Tell Gates to give me a call. And let's sit down and go over South Carolina colonial records. Let's go over the census in these areas that are classified as Native American subdivisions. Let's deal with it. I don't have time to play games. You want to learn your heritage? You want to learn your genealogy? Come to our classes. Because our classes deals with you. You will learn history. You will learn critical thinking. You will learn how to apply. You will understand how to read maps. You will understand the census codes. You will understand the enumerator schedules. They're thinking because we research all of that. These things are important. And this is why we stand alone in our teachings. All information is here. You just got to take the time and have an open mind and read. And if you don't know, be humble enough to ask somebody that does know. I've been studying a grand total of 15 years. 10 years digging in the archives. South Carolina has the most pristine records than any other state. And I'm going to tell you, you'd be surprised what you will find when you go through the archives. You'd be surprised what you will find when you go through these early Christian records. You find your people. You could be sitting in elementary school and they're teaching you about the Indians and have no clue that some of those pictures you're looking at might be your ancestor, grandfather, grandmother. Don't overlook that by a long shot. So deal with the metaphysical, the spiritual aspects of things now. The flesh don't work for you. Let's deal with the spirit. Let's meditate. Let's change our diet to eat the right foods that can enhance our intuition. Let's drink enough water to purify the body so the body can balance out and we can think clearly. Things are important. I will only tell you what has worked for me. I can die and come back 3 times. I'll do exactly the same identical thing. Because there's one thing, family. You cannot change the truth. You can lie all over it, but when you pull that lie apart, beneath the surface, there's the foundation of truth that lie was built upon. You cover it up all day long. You make a car. You can call it a truck all day. It's still a car. A donkey is not a horse. A crocodile is not an alligator, although they look the same. You examine, they are different. These things are crucial. Don't overlook these things. Ever. Take your time. Do your research. Relax. Refresh your mind. Study history. You go looking for your families in the 1700s, the 1600s. You come about the Southeast, and it's the 1600s. There's no Georgia. There's no Alabama. There's no Mississippi. There's no Tennessee. You got to be looking at the Carolinas. As time changed, then you get North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. But then again, depending on the time frame, in the 1600s, you better start looking at some Spanish ancestors, because Spain was up in here 200 years before the English. So your ancestors dealt with the Spanish, and those that converted to Catholicism took on Spanish names. Just study the history. When you devote your time to studying the history of the timelines and places that your ancestors lived, you become a more effective genealogist and family researcher. You have no break walls. You have to deal with what it is. I'm telling you what will give you peace of mind. Because many of you can't sleep. You're up 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning trying to figure this out. You can't. You got to be careful. Especially for those that live by the Dawes Road, you're going to run into some common names. Your ancestors ain't never been to that spot. Why are you saying that's them? You know in your heart you're not sure, but you want to believe and want to make yourself believe that is it. I'm sorry, that's not it. You got to understand that when tribes went west, especially from the Southeast, when they got there, They named those towns after the same places that they left behind. Many of those people got the same names. Chief, why would you say that? Because my grandmother that I loved dearly, Reuben Lee Langley, who was Reuben Lee Roberts, shows up on the Dawes Road in Stillwell, Georgia. That was Stillwell, Oklahoma. Reuben Lee Roberts, 1912. I know my mama never been to Oklahoma, so why I'm going to jump on that? I ain't even waste my time. And many of you need to be careful with these groups going around here using the Dawes Road to enroll you. Oh, your ancestors on the don't fall for that. You know good doggone well your father, your grandfather, their father, never been to Oklahoma or never been on a reservation. But you're so eager to gravitate, yes, I'm native. Don't fall for it and spend your $75 or $150. Not going to happen. You're going to be at a bigger shock and bigger disappointment when you find out that's not it. Stay away from it. Learn your history. These things are very important. I've given you the warning. They are out there. They will do it. So take your deep breath and say, no, I think I'm going to take time and learn my history. That is what you do. I'm going to study the area. Well, folks say, well, Chief, it's difficult because I don't know what race of Indian I am. Come to Savannah River Chieftain class. Let's sit down and take out some old colonial maps. And tell me where your family cemetery is. And tell me the oldest ancestor that's buried out there. Tell me about your church. Let's research the history of your church. Let's take a walk in your cemetery. There's a headstone. Let's see what direction it's facing. There in the trees, they buried next to a tree, an oak tree. Let's examine the situation. Did your grandmama wear a lot of beads and rings on her finger? What type stones were they? Did you wear earrings? Were they silver or copper? How were they shaped? Did you wear the headbands? What color were they? What type beads were in the headband? Or did you wear a headband in the morning or only at night? Let me share something. My great-grandmother, Ethel. My grandmother came to me 2 weeks before my mother died to prepare me. When I was small, at nights, we call her Big Mama, but she wasn't no Big Mama. She wasn't no more than about 5 foot, maybe 98 pounds. My grandmother Ethel, this is in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s. She never had any electricity in her house, and she did not want it. In 1970, when I would go to my grandmother's house, she had an outdoor toilet called the outhouse. We had flush and water, hot water. My grandmother didn't have it. She didn't want it. She could have got it. Her kids would have gave it to her. My dad would have given it to her. She didn't want it. She boiled her water. She had a wooden stove. We had to chop wood year round for her. That's what she was accustomed to. That's what she was at peace with. And at night, she had a candle. A lamp, I'm sorry. Kerosene lamp. And at night, we would read. She said, come here. I want you to read to me. See, my grandmother couldn't read, but she knew what things were. And at night, she would have a bedpan. And she would do her business, number one, in the bedpan. And in the morning, about 6 o'clock, she would go outside and throw it in the backyard. Now, my grandmother's backyard had the greenest grass. No golf court was greener than her grass. But there was no smell from her urine. The grandma, what you doing? Baby, I'm giving it back to Mother Earth. My grandmother operated off the clock, just like my Aunt Laura. She talked in moons. She didn't say days of the week. There's many moons. First moon, second moon. These are things I dealt with growing up. The morning dew, her urine, gave back to the universe. See? My grandmother ever could look outside and tell you 5 days in advance if it's going to rain. And it's sunny hot. Rain in a couple of days. She planted her garden by the moon. And she never planted the same vegetables in the same spot every year. She rotated. So we had fig trees and plum trees. And when we go to her house in the morning, baby, get up there and go eat you some of them figs off that tree there. You be all right. Grab some of those plums. That's how my grandmother. I got to experience that at 5, 6, 7 years old. And that's an experience I take with me for my rest of my entire life. See? That's a blessing in my life. I didn't grow up on a reservation. I grew up with people who lived in the community that still kept their native principle and practices. See? That kept me grounded. And everybody in the community know who Miss Ether was. And when I go home today, I'm still known as, that's Miss Ether, grand boy. And that's Miss Ruby, little boy. That's Mr. Solly, little boy. I'm almost 50 years old. Your ancestors will ground you in the community and leave a legacy for you to be admired for years to come. I can walk in the bank and get stuff off my grandmother's name. See what I'm talking about? These things are important in life. So because of their character and their good dealings with people, I benefit from that today. And that's why I take it from myself to carry out the legacy that they left for me. They don't leave me any money. Mama left me a legacy. Baby, this is who you are. Now, what you do, either you can make it work for you or not. This is yours. Talk as much as you want. We've been quiet for years. Tell the story, baby. Let them know. I may not be here the whole while, but me and your daddy will be watching from the other side. So I embrace my ancestors And when I pray to my mom and daddy. That's the only God and goddesses I know. I don't deny Christian principles, but I got to pray to my mom and my daddy. That's the mother and the father. The sun and the moon. The creators gave them to me. They pray to the creator. See? These things in life is very important. See, many of you have to go back and sit and watch the signs of your ancestors. Remember what your grandmother did. Remember what your grandfather did. Are great, and how did they do it? These are things that tell you who they are. Don't just ignore it. Don't. I tell people all the time, when my mother made herbs, my mother didn't mess with no African herbs. She wasn't African. No. It ain't come from this part of the earth. I don't want it. See, that's another thing you need to analyze. If your ancestor was medicine people, whether they're African or Indian, what you need to understand is what type herbs they're using. Where did these herbs originate from? When you study that, that will tell you a lot about them. See, my mother dealt with what was native to Georgia and South Carolina. Because she tell me, hey, I know what works. My grandmama used it, they used it, I'm going to use it, baby, you going to use it. These things are important. But you overlook these things. You take these things for granted by not remembrance of them. These things you have to do every time. I tell people all the time, when you saw your granddaddy had that top hat and had that feather, that's a sign. Why did granddaddy wear that feather in the hat? And what type of feather it was? Every Sunday, little feather. Chief hat. Why was it a chief hat? Because he was a headman? These traditions went in these AME churches. Probably went in some of these Baptist churches. But I speak from the AME church. See? People, learn your history. When you combine history, genealogy, and understanding timelines and events and local histories, you have no brick walls. My daddy will always tell me, we talk sometime, and we talk about the Gullah Geechee people. He'd always say, the Africans down in Beaufort. And one thing Dad admired about the Africans, they remembered something called the big gun shoot. See, most people don't realize this. The Gullah Geechees got the 40 acres and a mule because Sherman created that 30 or 35-mile stretch from the ocean to go 250-some miles. From Jackson, North Carolina, to Jacksonville, Florida. They got their 40 acres and a mule. So many people around here laughing at the Gullah Geechees. I wouldn't if I were you. Because Lincoln paid them a visit in 1863. As a matter of fact, they were free before 1865. Because when the war came, the planters left those islands, and those people inherited those lands. So I understand clearly today why the Gullah Geechees got their $10 million heritage grants. They know who they are. Those people would be admired. They kept their heritage because they were isolated on those islands for a very long time. Up until the 50s, some of those islands, you had to take a boat to go through. So they didn't mix with a lot of people. These people are isolated. They know their history. So the lands that they didn't get, the government took, and therefore you have your Paris Islands, your Marine bases, your air bases, from these island people. General Butler and Sherman paved the way for them. You don't want to take my word for it? Go read the history. I'm not African. I'm Yuchi, but I respect those people down there because they know their history and they kept it pure. You are cut off because you don't remember your history or it wasn't taught. I'm blessed because my family taught me who I am and left me enough clues to go dig deeper, something they didn't want me to know. I tell people all the time, when my grandmother got dementia in the afternoon, I got a hold of Mama's secrets. I was writing down because dementia, dimension. Mama's on another plane talking to Daddy, Grandma, everybody else. I'm listening, writing down. Mama goes speaking in tongue. Mama not speaking in tongue. Mama speaking in her Yuchi language. Whoa. Oh, we on to something here now. I couldn't wait sometime. It become a pattern. Let me get around Mama about 6 or 7 o'clock this afternoon because I got to listen to what Mama's talking about and who she's talking to. This is spiritual. Here I am. My 40s, 45, 46, listening to Mama. Writing this down. Whoa, yeah. Heard Mama said something, I went and called up the archives the next day. They sent me a form to fill out and get notarized, and I sent them $35, and they sent me my grandfather's land patent from 1778 that I didn't know we had. None of the other family knew. But I heard Mama talking one evening while she was in a state of dementia. So this is why I'm telling you a metaphysical approach to removing roadblocks. So sometimes the spirit get a hold of you. This is a spiritual walk. I don't tell you what I reckon. I tell you what I know. Mama study, go to talking. I'm writing down. I go take a trip to the courthouse. Let me take a look at this over here. Whoa! I'll be damned. Oh, yeah. See, it's a blessing sometimes. See, many a times, y'all have to look at a bad situation like you're looking at a stumbling block and turn a mishaps into a blessing depending on what the situation is. So my mom, going back in a childlike state, saddened me because of her age. But at the same time, I broke through codes and barriers of 200-300 years of history that lay dominant. I was wise enough to do that. So I'm telling you, certain things you don't overlook. Not today, not tomorrow. And even though your ancestors are gone, romance them in your mind. Become conscious of their living again in your mind, and they will come to you. in spirit, and you hear voices in your head. But don't think you're going crazy, because you're not. Many of your ancestors that didn't get to see you in the flesh, and you didn't get to see them, but you are a part of them, you can romance and speak with them in spirit. Don't let nobody fool you. See? That's one thing I love about my family. They became Christians, but they didn't become Christianized to the point that we lost our natural belief system. They didn't lose it. Even in the church, they didn't lose it. Because mama wouldn't send her babies to the doctors for certain things. No. Go get some salve. Go get some life everlasting. Go get some coon root. Mix it with a little bit of fire water. You be all right. Baby, you see that garden, that garden over there that's been growing back there? Whenever you get sick, you go get you a little bit of that. Just take it right out of the ground, dust it off, a little bit of water on it, cut it in half, and you eat that. Eat it raw and pure. You be all right. My grandfather that raised me from 3 days old, Daddy used to have me examine ants. Come here, boy. Look at these ants. Study them. Had a dog named Inky. Dog gets sick, go out and eat grass. Daddy, come here, son. Watch Inky. Daddy, why he's eating grass? When you get sick, I'm going to give you some grass. Wheatgrass. Now folks going around today getting wheatgrass. I knew what wheatgrass was back in the 70s as a child. My dad had me study animals. Son, listen to the birds early in the morning. You can determine by the sounds of the bird how the weather is going to be. I didn't need to be on no reservation for that. Come on. Some people still on the Savannah River, where they've always been for hundreds of years. These things are important. Can't take that away from me. Son, this is who you are. Bird chirping, Daddy tell me how to chirp back at the bird. You want to talk to the bird? Come here. Daddy whistle, the bird whistle. I learned to whistle. He said, now if you're ever in the woods and you get lost, you talk to the birds. They will guide you. Daddy used to sit me down in a field, and I'd listen to the voices in the wind. Do you hear it, son? Tell me what you hear. Yes, sir. All right, then. Son, when you go through the woods, you don't want to make a sound because you don't even want to hear yourself. Just listen to the trees because they'll tell you something. Okay? Son, look how the wind blows. Is it the tree moving or is it the wind moving the tree? Son, which direction the wind is blowing? Do you know? Just look at the tree. You don't see the wind, but you see the direction that the leaves are blowing. This is nature. I got nature teachings as a child. These things are very important in life. They're priceless. And though my mother and father are gone, sometimes when I'm at my alone time, I shed my tears of happiness of what they gave me that made me a man that is priceless. These things are very important. Life is very important. You got to understand these things. This is a spiritual walk. So now you go back on this journey and look for your ancestors. You think about some of the things that I have told you. And you reminisce. And as you go deeper on this journey, they will speak to you in your mind. And if something pops out and grabs your attention, don't ignore it. Examine it. Things are very important. Life is very important. My dad used to take us in the woods sometime and we put earrings in our ear, one metal and one silver, because we were dealing with the ancestors and intuition. So if you put the silver in one ear and the gold in the other, you can balance out the spirits talking to you. Because sometimes you got two gold earrings in your ear. You can't handle it. These things are very important. Very. So you find me on Facebook sometime. And I utilize Facebook to educate. I don't play games with it. Because I know many people are searching on this journey and re-give them truth. I'm not here to play any games with you. I ain't going to take $400 or $500 from you. I'm going to give you some knowledge. And give you a spoken word. Because I'm not going to be here forever. There are too many missing pieces to the puzzle. I have been blessed to have many of these pieces. My message is not just to African Americans who have native blood. My message is also to the Caucasians who want to listen. This is a native walk. Bring your Indianness to me. Let's talk. I've enjoyed y'all tonight. Sometime the spirit gets a hold of me. Please understand. I'm going to open the floor up. I'm going to do one call at a time. If you have any questions for me, I'll try to answer. There's one thing about me, as much knowledge that I've attained over the years. I am quick to tell you and humble myself when I do not know. I will try to find the answers for you. I don't know everything. I am constantly involved in this journey myself, even at my level of understanding. But I will try and point you in the right direction. So right now, I'm going to open the calls up. 614. You have any questions?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, it's not so much. Well, it's sort of a question. I noticed you said you had a family member who was. Oh, let me cut this down. I noticed you had a family member. Who you said whose name was Big Mama, and I've noticed that there's consistency with that in other families. I don't know. I guess I just want to know, what significance would that have as far as like, is that like specific certain tribe or whatever, perhaps. I don't know. Just that's
Big Mama
right now.
Big Mama is what we call our oldest living relative. She was the mama of all mamas. Call her Big Mama. I can't say that tied to any Africanness. I don't know. They may do it too. But like I tell everybody, my ancestors told me as far as they can go back, we didn't come from Africa. Now that's just my story. Others are different. But one thing I know, I have to go back. How far can my grandmother remember? And how far did her mother remember? Because it could be, if I went back 500 years as far as I could go, there could be another 200 years in there. Then it might be an African in there, might be a European in there, might be a German in there, a Mexican in the line. I don't know. But as a genealogist, I keep it professional with that because I have to deal with black and white. So I have to practice what I preach. If I'm going to continue to evolve and be successful, I have to deal with truth. So when it comes to that aspect, I tell people beyond 1725, I don't know. Up until 1725, no. Because my mother and my father are related. My family on both sides have intermarried. I go to family reunion, they don't want me to talk. Please be quiet. Why? We're the product of this. One thing it did, kept the blood pure. So, from that note on Big Mom, that's all I can tell you. That's all we called her. She was the oldest relative of her sisters and brothers, and they called her Big Mama. So that's what we call. Like I said, she wasn't no more than about 5 foot tall, maybe 80 pounds. That's who she was. That answer your question? Thank you. Okay.
Well, yes, that's my question. See some consistency in that. Thank you.
Okay. 267. You have any questions? 267 going once, going twice. I think that's Alabama. I'm not sure. Okay. 856. You have any questions? 856. Question. Okay. Any questions? Okay. 770. You have any questions? 770. Okay. 414. Have any questions? Any questions?
Yes. Hello, T.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sitting listening to the broadcast. I am actually a student of yours, and I wanted for you to elaborate a little more on where you said in colonial times, a lot of those states didn't allow slavery, and slavery didn't exist in a lot of those states. Because
let me answer your question. What I meant was you had different types of slavery. They didn't operate on chattel slavery. It was different. They operate on the principles of indigent servant, or they let their slaves roam free. A lot of people had the concept a happier slave is a better worker. He stays around. My crops are more productive. I make more money. Many of these plantation owners paid their slaves because they were Quakers. Quakers really didn't agree with slavery. Now, if you take Georgia, as I said for a long time, Georgia was a free state. And Virginia sent them 66,000 free Africans in exile. And the ones that remained, because Virginia changed the laws, got stripped of their property, and many of them ended up in slavery. These things are very important to understand. And one thing a lot of people don't understand, they need to study the introduction of rice into this country. Rice will tell you where these Africans came from, because many of these African slaves that came here was rice farmers. And they brought them from certain areas in Africa. Rice and cotton is native of Africa, not the United States. So when you go back and look at the records and look at the bill of sales and look at where they were getting these slaves from, they were getting these people who was rice and cotton farmers. And they placed them in certain locations in the colony. So when people say, I don't know where I come from, they need to take the time and research. Don't follow that crap, no Africans came here. That's bull crap. Many of them didn't come in the number of the ships that they said it was, because they died along the way. People can't stay cramped up, seasick, poor environment, people died. When you go back and look at the logs, you might find one or two ships to bring 200 people or 300, depending on what type of cargo ship it is. But slavery happened. And people need to grasp and get understanding with the concept there's a difference between America and Americas. Another thing they need to understand, they concentrating on the 500,000 Africans that came in this country. 300,000 came, 80,000 came from out the transatlantic. The other 120,000 came from the Caribbean. But what about the 250,000 that came here free? Because they don't want to identify with free African slave owners. Better recognize that happened. Go read immigration. So it was a different type of slavery. There was chattel slavery, but not all these plantation owners whipped their slaves and chained their slaves up, because slaves cost. More slaves they had, more allotted lands they could get. So why would they try and kill their slaves? Because the number of slaves you had amounted to the number of wealth you could attain. For every slave, they gave them so many acres of land. Slave died, they had to file to get paid for that slave. I've seen situations whereas equivalent of one slave today would have cost between $12,000 and $24,000. These records exist. So folks to say slavery didn't exist, they need to take their sorry behinds and go start studying some real literature and get away from the history books and go into the archives where these logs are. So there ain't no slave ship. I've seen one. I've been on one. I have pictures. I have posted the pictures. It's nonsense. I will agree. Millions didn't come here, but they came, and these ships exist. They might have prototypes here in America, but they don't have prototypes in Scotland. They don't have prototypes in the Netherlands. They don't have prototypes in England. I question some of the prototypes they say here. They probably call them prototypes because they don't want some of these angry Negroes to go out there and burn up these ships. That's just my opinion. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did, Chief. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I have one more question if time allows.
Okay.
One of the biggest myths in history with the community I belong in is the 3/5 law. Could you elaborate why black people actually consider 3/5 a human?
No, that's not a myth. It's a misunderstanding. That dealt with on a tax base. And what a lot of people don't understand is that during that time, you had a lot of Europeans living in these Indian nations, owning slaves and not paying taxes. So if they wanted any state representative, they had to pay taxes on the number of slaves that they had. But these people were still counting slaves in the general population, but they didn't want to pay taxes on them. So when it came for them to have state representation, they claimed the slaves. So the government was saying, you can't do that. How are you going to have this many representatives if you're not paying taxes on them? What y'all need to do is get all these Indian nations and we're going to tax you. And you will find, when you go look in the record, the majority of the people on the Trail of Tears, there were more Scottish and Irish people than the Indians. All you gotta do is go read the records. Well, Chief, I ain't never heard of that before. Then go read. You want a copy of it? Hit me up on Facebook and I'll give you that census data of that. That is what they were talking about. It was from a tax and representative base, just like they do today. State representatives get a number of representatives by the number of people. There was a misunderstanding of how they interpret that. But you can't tell a lot of these liberals that. They're going to get upset. Many of them probably getting upset right now. I know that means the real 1/3 of it. No, you better go back and read it from the law perspective. You're just reading that in the Constitution. Well, go read why the Constitution put it there and see what it says. You get a totally different perspective. I hope I've answered it.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, anybody else have any questions? If not, I'm going to leave.